Hello there and welcome to NCC Group's monthly Cyber Threat Intelligence webinar. I'm Matt Hull, VP of Cyber Intelligence and Response here at NCC Group, and I'll be your host as always for this month's webinar, where we're going to be looking at what's been going on over the last month or so, from April right the way through until today. We'll be giving you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what's going on in the big bad world of cyber threats. Just to give you a bit of an update as what we're going to be talking about today, the usual sort of overview of ransomware stats and trends, a canter through what's going on in the world of cyber threats, so some of the themes and topics that I think are worth calling out since the last time we had a chance to speak, as well as some critical vulnerability issues, and there's a few clangers in there today. And then I wasn't intended on doing this until a little bit later on in the year, to be honest, but I've had loads of questions over the last week or so about the World Cup this year, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to do a bit of a spotlight on what the World Cup means from a cybersecurity point of view and give a bit of an overview there. So next 30 minutes or so, let's see what we've got going on in the world of ransomware. So looking back at what April was looking like, so there was a slight decline in the number of ransomware victims that we tracked between April and March, only 7%. Don't get me wrong, there's still hundreds and hundreds of victims being reported on various leak sites each month. We are slowly entering that seasonal period where we do see a little bit of a downtick in the number of ransomware victims if we go into the summer period. As you can see there from 2025, that's slow drop off ever so slightly, a little bit of a blip in June. So we may be heading in that direction again. This would be the 5th year on the run that NCC Group have been monitoring these sorts of trends, and we see this every single year, and then another ramp up towards the end of the year into the Christmas period. Usual sort of targeting spread from a regional point of view. So the North American continent, 43% of victims, closely followed in Europe by 28%, and then a bit of a looser spread across the rest of the world. Just from a European point of view, UK, France, then Germany is the order of play for countries within the bloc, so to speak. Ransomware groups killing continues to smash it in terms of their activity. Relatively low profile incidents, but lots and lots of victims. So we don't see much of them in the news, so to speak, but they are very active. The gentleman in second place there in this month's Threat Pulse, so our monthly report. There is a bit of a deep dive on the gentleman, so watch out for that. I think that's going to be distributed either later on today or tomorrow. There's also some other pretty decent write-ups on the gentleman out and about at the moment as well, so well worth the read on those. Loads of detail on their TTPs. Of course, there was a lot learned about the group from some of the leaked comms behind the group back end of last year. And then the usual sort of players in there. First, however, time we've seen ShinyHunters in this list. Normally big impact victims, but not making our sort of top threat actors. But there they are, 3 from the bottom in terms of these numbers. I will be mentioning them again today because they've been very active over the last couple of weeks as well. In terms of sector targeting, industrials, closely followed by consumer discretionary, and then IT and healthcare continue to be the top most targeted sectors. Industrials, of course, I mention it every month, is a big old spread of different types of organizations, including IT services and law firms and advisories and consultancies and so on. So quite a big economic sector. But that's what ransomware is looking like at the moment. We will continue to keep an eye on that as always in terms of the number of victims. If there's anything worth calling out, of course, we'll issue those in our threat alerts and advisories in our monthly threat reports as well. So having a look at what's going on in the big bad world, then let's start with ShinyHunters. So you shouldn't have missed it, or I wouldn't have thought you'd missed it. But Canvas, widely used marking and grading platform used globally by educational establishments, was compromised, or the infrastructure, the organization infrastructure, I think it is, were compromised as a result of a previous ShinyHunters breach. This had a massive impact on students across the globe and examiners and teachers. Essentially took out the platform. What's interesting, and it's come out over the last week or so, is that the organisation behind Canvas appear to have paid ShinyHunters their ransom. And in so doing, ShinyHunters have claimed that they have deleted the data that was stolen as a result of the incident. And that data included, personal PII of students, teachers, their grades, and other sort of information. So mentioning it because ShinyHunters continue to target organizations and then target further organizations using the data that they have stolen. So quite interesting to see whether they have in fact stolen the data that's come off the back of this particular incident. We've got a comment, I heard it ping. Dave, working in education, it was a royal pain to find out how Canvas was involved in our supply chain. Various organizations used affected, rebranded version of the platform rather than Canvas itself. That's interesting. So yeah, that further knock-on effect and how difficult it was as well. And then Tony, yeah, a BBC article there. So Instructure pay ShinyHunters. Interestingly, they don't say that they've paid them. I think they say something along the lines of that we've had an agreement between the two groups, but we obviously know this is a criminal group. The agreement will involve money, no doubt. But on that point, I will continue to emphasise from the incident response lead here at NCC Group, we get involved in a lot of this sort of work. Our stance continues to be do not pay ransom. It fuels that criminal ecosystem. There is absolutely no guarantee whatsoever that ShinyHunters will mete out their side of the bargain and actually delete the data that was part of it. But again, another prime example of a big old supply chain type attack that has impact on multiple organizations around the globe, all because of poor password hygiene and identity controls in short term. So that is Canvas and what went on there. Another one that I think I mentioned probably back end of last year, earlier on this year, we've seen all sorts of compromises within the supply chain, particularly around NPM packages and also PyPI ecosystems. Shai-Hulud is the worm that has been responsible for a lot of this activity. Essentially, what happens is this worm propagates through sort of dependencies, these libraries, and harvests and credentials of devs, and then moves on to the next package and deploys those, and so on and so forth. We end up with this sort of chain reaction. So Shai-Hulud been very successful. There are some concerns because in the last week or so, the source code behind Shai-Hulud has been made available publicly online. Whether it's been leaked or what, I don't know, but it is now available for other criminals or other individuals to leverage that particular worm. So I'm raising this because we've seen massive impact across this supply chain ecosystem. We've reported many times on some of the compromises in NPM. This is likely to lead to further issues within this space. So from a mitigation point of view, essentially use threat intelligence to try and monitor for these vulnerable versions and dependencies, and where possible, keep track of where you need to roll back to last known good versions of these things. Really impactful on devs. So if you have devs or engineers within your organizations, this is something that they absolutely need to be aware of and maintain the confidentiality and the integrity of these CI/CD pipelines within your environment. We'll continue to report on anything that we become aware of through our regular threat advisories and reports. But I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention as a potential ramp up there in risk around supply chain. Next on the list, I wanted to share some insights from our incident response world over the last month or so. This is something that I want to add now that I look after IR in NCC Group as well as threat intel. But I wanted to touch on initial access. So what we're seeing is those entry mechanisms into organizations that we're helping to deal with incidents. Number one, social engineering, particularly phishing emails, are the number one source of compromise that we've seen over the last month in our incident response cases. I think we've touched on this several times in these webinars, but the continued successes of large language models to help social engineering activity continues to shine through, really. And people, unfortunately, continue to be that sort of weak link within the chain. So keep an eye on that. It's just that constant message around awareness and training and education around social engineering. We appreciate it's getting harder to monitor and keep an eye on and spot those phishing activities, but that is where we're seeing the increase in breaches. The other side of this, and we've not gotten to the Mythos topic on the threat webinars yet, but we have seen a slight increase in the number of organizations that have been breached through exploitation of known vulnerable internet-facing infrastructure. So essentially, an increase in targeting through 0 days and exploits. Now, I want to temper sort of expectations on this one, because we've heard a lot of noise around Mythos and what that could potentially bring to the table in terms of increasing vulnerabilities. But there isn't enough evidence from my point of view and from our assessment at this point to say that this increase in breaches through vulnerable infrastructure is as a result of what's come out of Project Glasswing. And simply put, that's because that project or that piece of research is so closed off from the public, and it's so closed source that it's unlikely to be resulting in these sorts of breaches, certainly from a criminal point of view. So I'm mentioning this simply because we ought to not be distracted too much by some of the noise that's coming out of what's happening within that environment. There is a lot going on. It's worth paying attention to, but at the moment, continue to focus on the basics, the fundamentals. Try not to be distracted by all of the noise over there when we have a clear present problem and challenge in front of us. It's kind of two parallel tracks that need to be happening. We did have another question ping then, I'm sure. Dave, we've got Dave again. My understanding that most of the vulnerabilities discovered by Mythos can also be found. They can indeed. So I want to be careful about how I sort of describe this current situation. It is worth paying attention to. There is a significant step change in what is going on. But I think as more security researchers start to look at the findings from Project Glasswing, and certainly what we're seeing in the real world and the impact from it, the reality is that we may see an uptick in number of vulnerabilities that are identified, and we probably will have to be able to prioritize those in a better way as defenders. But at the moment, it's not the only thing that's doing it, and dare I say, some fantastic marketing and activity in that sense. So yeah, Dave, you're absolutely right. Other models are able to do this, and also it's worth mentioning the fact that a lot of the vulnerabilities that are found during this don't necessarily work, and it will cost an awful lot of money to run these tools and these models to actually try and find vulnerabilities as well. So there's also some questions around the economies of scale when it comes to identifying them. So next, a couple of vulnerabilities worth mentioning. Something dubbed as yellow key. So this is a bypassing BitLocker. This is only really going to be a massive issue for organizations if you have company laptops, you've got lots of people working from home. Essentially, this is a bypass of BitLocker. So an attacker could get access to that encrypted recovery environment on a laptop if they had physical access to the laptop. The big mitigation to this, though, so I do caveat it, it's a fairly straightforward mitigation, is to apply TPM and PIN. So essentially make sure that when your laptop boots up, you enter a BitLocker PIN and add that. The only sort of proviso is, by default, TPM plus PIN isn't enabled on most Windows laptops. So have that put in place. It is possible to pump that out through an MDM, but if there's sort of self-managed builds or bring your own devices, that's something that's worth looking at there. As I say, it's quite high criticality, but it requires physical access to the device, and it can be quite easily mitigated with some of those controls. But I did want to call it out in this particular environment. The other thing that we put a threat alert out about last week was cPanel, so the widely used web application, web server, sort of tool, platform, whatever you want to call it, my head stopped working because of the heat, is being actively exploited by a threat actor which has been dubbed Mr. Rot 13 by security researchers. Vulnerability there, CVE 2026-41940, allows for authentication bypass, remote authentication bypass of cPanel. Easily mitigated. There are some patches that have been put out already, but wanted to raise that as CISA have raised concerns, as have NCSC, because of this being actively exploited in the wild. Is that it for my vulnerabilities? Oh, no, one more. A very old one by all accounts, although a new vulnerability. So security researchers have identified and raised to F5 through responsible disclosure, CVE 2026-42945, which has been dubbed Nginx Rift. This affects the enterprise and open source versions of Nginx, essentially allows for remote code execution and remote access. There is a public proof of concept that's been released, although there is no known exploitation in the wild as of me speaking now. But this is likely to be something that could be targeted. As I say, it's very old, impacts a lot of historic versions of Nginx, but there is patching available for it now as well. So that's it from a vulnerability and threat point of view. Let's take a little look at the World Cup. As I say, had a lot of interest about this over the last couple of weeks, so I thought I'd throw a couple of slides together and talk my assessment through it with everyone. Sorry. So it's getting a lot of attention, or it is going to get a lot of attention. It's a big old global event, impacts a lot of organizations because the World Cup doesn't just happen because of the World Cup. There are a lot of supporting organizations. There's a lot of infrastructure around the event itself. It's being held in North America as well, just to top things off. So there's an awful lot of global media attention, and there's a lot of political visibility of it, especially when you consider what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. As I say, there's a big ecosystem that is there that makes it happen. You know, it's not just about the broadcast of the event. While that is very important, it's not just about the physical grounds, but there's the transport, there's the travel arrangements that people are going to be making, there's the payment systems, there are hospitality. You know, people are going to be traveling into North America, Canada, and Mexico as well for these events. And not to mention all of the potential impact on us as consumers as well. Fake websites with football kits on, and people phishing us, trying to say that we've won a competition to get tickets to the World Cup, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of public engagement as well. So from a consumer point of view, there's a lot of impact us as individuals, and there is a responsibility as vendors to support our clients as well. So essentially what we have is a big global event, public stage, impacts an awful lot of people, has a lot of organizations that the event is dependent on, and it's likely to be an evolving environment depending on the nature of the clubs and the teams that go through, who's being successful, who's not, and then obviously the impact from that as well. So what is the most likely activity that we're going to see out of the World Cup? There's a good chance that a lot of your organizations may be part of it or on the periphery of it. So we are going to see an increase in phishing and social engineering activity in general. I've already had spam in my personal mailbox about the World Cup, using the World Cup as an opportunity or as some context behind social engineering. We see this in all sorts of worldwide events as well. I was reading something about Eurovision the other day, and how the Austrian equivalent of NCSC had to deal with upwards of 400 cyber attacks just to Eurovision. Obviously, that's big in Europe, but not necessarily the rest of the world. But what we're seeing with the World Cup is significantly bigger, so having to deal with that as well. Ticket scams and brand impersonation. This is a great opportunity for organizations to monitor for this type of activity. So brand impersonation, fake social media accounts appearing online, purporting to be a legitimate organization. As I mentioned already, scams around tickets. You know, you've won tickets to this event. Awareness around those things is really important. But more importantly, one of the other big impacts is around credential theft or theft of PII, because as soon as you, or as an individual or an organization, starts adding these details to a website or clicking through links, some of that data is potentially going to be exposed to criminals who will then leverage that for onward activity, whether it be fraud or identity cloning and so on. Hacktivism. So we've covered the sort of criminal angle. Hacktivism is likely to come out of this in some way, shape, or form, whether that is denial of service, more likely misinformation and sort of fake news, that sort of thing on social media, but also potentially website defacement as well. There's an awful lot of effort, no doubt, going into the security of the event overall. I'm sure CISA and the FBI are involved in that, but there is always that possibility of disruption to broadcasting or disruption to the event in forms of activism and denial of service. Although they're going to be relatively low impact, there is that potential. And then, of course, there's just that opportunity. Opportunistic threat groups or criminal groups are going to see this as an opportunity to be successful, essentially. There's got an awful lot of infrastructure that's associated with the event. As I say, there are a lot of organizations involved in it. There's likely to be things spun up quite quickly, where security may not always be the first thought. So this is an opportunity, and I've talked about this as well many times before. Threat is a measure of capability of your threat actor, their motivation and the opportunity to do something about it. So if they're presented with an opportunity, the threat is likely to increase in terms of the attention to the event. So there are a lot of things that as organizations we need to be thinking about, as consumers as well, as individuals, as people. If we're interested in football or the World Cup, we need to be aware of those things as well. So let's cut through the noise. What do we know? It's a big old sporting event. Criminal groups do routinely target these sorts of events, whether that be through phishing or scams or fraud. That is likely to happen. We also know that hacktivist groups have targeted these sorts of events in the past, looking at some of the previous Olympic Games over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. And we know as well that supply chain risk is big when it comes to these events. It is anyway, but when there's an event of this scale, there's a lot of organizations that form part of that chain and increase the attack surface. What do we need to be thinking about? What do we need to be wary of? Where is some of that noise? And these are some of the questions that came out through some interviews I've been doing recently, so I thought it worth sharing it with you. We need to be careful of attributing any particular incidents or attacks associated with the World Cup with nation states without evidence. And that's really important anyway. You know, we need to make sure that we do attribute incidents properly and effectively, and that's where CISA, UK NCSC and other NCSCs will come in and have a say when it comes to these types of things. It's also really important to acknowledge that if there are cyber campaigns launched against the World Cup, they're not all necessarily geopolitically motivated. We know that America is big in the world stage at the moment, especially with what's going on in the Middle East. The Iranian threat towards America and people attending the games is real, and there's particularly from a hacktivist and proxy group point of view, but not all of the activity will be geopolitically motivated. A lot of it will just be opportunists and criminal groups. And sort of leading on to those 2 points, really, not everything is going to be sophisticated when it comes to attacks. A simple social engineering campaign or someone spinning up a fake merchandise website is fairly basic stuff. And if we're aware of that and we don't go for the shiny thing, or we don't treat everything as a great opportunity ourselves to do something cheaper or get tickets, for example, then we'll mitigate a lot of that threat. And it was sort of asked of me last week, where are we in terms of cyber war at the moment? What's going on in the world between the different states? Is there the potential that we're in a kind of not peace, not war sort of situation? And could the World Cup be leveraged for that? Yes, potentially. But a lot of that stuff is probably already happening behind the scenes anyway, and we're just simply not aware of it. But what I do think we should focus on is more that opportunistic threat and the cyber criminal threat within this environment. And how do we do that? Identity and access management. It continues to be the front line as far as I'm concerned. Our incident response cases that I've mentioned continue to show that being really relevant. The successes that a lot of the ransomware operators are having, leveraging stolen credentials and reusing them to gain access to organizations, continues to be really relevant. So focus on identity and access management and those sorts of IDAM services. Third party and supply chain assurance. Organizations are going to be part of that supply chain. We have our own supply chains as well, or downstream supply chains. So the due diligence around those, if we are in an environment where we're going to be onboarding new vendors, new software, new tools rapidly to meet a particular circumstance, then we need to make sure that we're doing the due diligence on those things before we do that, but also more importantly when we're offboarding as well, make sure that those connections are severed. So the phishing awareness piece is kind of everyone's responsibility. This it's not just the vendors, it's not just the games themselves, but all of us just to be mindful. Just share that little bit of knowledge with your grandparents, your mum and dad, if they're old enough like mine are, and just make sure that they're aware that these things do happen. They do happen to people. Scams are going on every single day, and we operate in this world, so we kind of have an awareness of it. So share that knowledge. We will continue. So I will, my team, NCC Group, will share anything that's worth noting in relation to the games as we continue to monitor it. It's one of our priority intelligence requirements at the moment, just to monitor what's going on in terms of this space. So we will report any threats or advisories that come off the back of it. And I guess linking to the third-party assurance, just make sure that you have good visibility of your assets, your internet-facing infrastructure, your data sets, but also, I've mentioned this again a few times on our webinars, if you have the opportunity to be monitoring for digital risks, so exposure of credentials, narrative on dark web forums and marketplaces, things like that, do that. And use the World Cup as some of that narrative to see if you can help find anything that's out there that shouldn't be out there. I did spot a question just before I wrap things up. Yosef, apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name right, noting to have caution when referring to attribution of state sponsor of attacks, cyber warfare, etc. All ignore the fact that there's clear evidence that grey zone hybrid warfare methods are yes, I think I understand the point that you're making there. So there is a big grey area. You know, we do need to be careful. There is an acknowledgement that nation states are behind a lot of these attacks, but we do have to be careful. Certainly as a private sector, we don't want to be making claims when we shouldn't be. But yes, I get your point. So yeah, that's it for me. Hope you have a cracking rest of your week. If you are able to enjoy the weather and you're just watching this on catch up, then well done to you for taking this week off. I'll catch you next week if you happen to be at InfoSec. If not, I'll see you in, it should be 2026, mate. You're absolutely right. Well spotted. We'll get that sorted on my template. We'll catch you in about a month's time when I see you for the next monthly webinar. Thanks very much for the interaction. Good to see you. Well, thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.